these are the easiest crops on Earth to grow.
These tubers that I'm about to dig for might make you fart like a champion, but they're also very good for you and extremely tasty.
It was once called the sunroot, a plant so resilient it fed nations during war, outlasted empires, and healed poisoned soil without asking for anything in return.
There's a vegetable that's even easier to grow, tastes delicious, and needs almost no care.
It cannot be patented, owned, or tamed, and that may be why it was nearly erased. But its story didn't end. It just went underground. This is the root system they tried to forget. The Forgotten Feast. In 1605, a French explorer named Samuel de Champlain stepped ashore on the eastern edge of what would become Massachusetts. The air was cold, the voyage long, and the welcome unexpectedly warm. The Algonquin people, who had thrived in these woodlands for generations, offered the weary crew a feast. Among the wild game and berries was a peculiar root, knobby, steaming, and unknown to European eyes. They called it kaishuk pinak, or sunroot. Champlain tasted it, paused, and tasted again. Nutty, crisp, with a subtle sweetness that rivaled the artichokes of Europe. It was unlike anything he'd encountered. He saw more than food. He saw a commodity. The tubers were loaded onto ships, bound for royal gardens and peasant kitchens alike. But what he didn't know was that this wasn't just a root crop. It was part of a survival architecture, engineered by nature and perfected by indigenous cultivation. Long before colonists arrived, Native American tribes understood its power. The Iroquois told stories of the sunroot's origin in myth, tied to sacrifice and rebirth. To them, it wasn't just nourishment, it was memory, insurance, and independence, growing quietly beneath the soil. It asked for nothing, and in return, it gave everything. A system that needed no kings. Modern agriculture rests on a simple assumption. Civilization requires hard labor. Fields must be tilled, seeds sown, crops harvested, and lands irrigated. But the sunroot, Helianthus tuberosus, challenges that belief at its core. It is not an annual crop like wheat or corn. It is perennial. You plant it once, and it keeps coming back year after year, asking for no plow, no pesticide, and no irrigation. For early native communities, this wasn't just a convenience, it was liberation. This crop formed the basis of what some archaeologists now believe was a continent-spanning agricultural system, one that predates European notions of farming. Rather than cultivating endless rows of fragile monocultures, indigenous people planted sunroots in forest clearings, along riverbanks, and near settlements, where they quietly multiplied underground. Its tubers spread through rhizomes, forming vast networks that function like a botanical hive mind, sharing nutrients, communicating threats, and triggering chemical defenses collectively. In this way, sunroot fields didn't just grow food, they maintained ecosystems. And they did it without the human labor that annual grains demand. Corn needs constant management, wheat needs hierarchy. But sunroots grow in chaos and thrive in neglect. They resist standardization, and that makes them incompatible with empires. Because a crop that doesn't need kings, taxes, or toil doesn't build empires. It unbuilds them. The empire's choice. For a brief moment in history, the sunroot seemed destined to save Europe. After Champlain's voyage, it spread across the continent under new names: Topinambur in France, Girasol in Italy. It was hailed as a miracle crop that needed no fertilizer, no tilling, no care. You could plant it in spring, walk away, and come back in the fall to a bounty. Its calorie output rivaled corn, even in poor soil. But that promise didn't last. As the industrial age dawned, a different set of priorities took hold. Potatoes, with their smooth, uniform shape, were easier to harvest by machine. They stored better and traveled farther and fit neatly into a system that prioritized shelf life and profit over resilience. Sunroots, by contrast, shriveled quickly once dug up and proved too irregular for emerging industrial models. The wars gave the sunroot one last breath. During World War I, German families rediscovered it when famine struck. In Nazi-occupied France during World War II, sunchokes helped families survive, while official food supplies were seized for the front lines. And still, after liberation, survivors refused to eat them. The association with hunger and occupation was too powerful. A crop that thrived in collapse was no longer welcome in peace. The gut-brain axis. Beneath the folklore and famine survival lies a lesser-known medical marvel. Sunchokes are composed of up to 60% inulin by weight, a prebiotic fiber with remarkable effects. Unlike common starches that convert quickly into sugar, inulin bypasses digestion, feeding beneficial bacteria in the colon instead. This bacterial feast sparks a chain reaction that improves calcium absorption, supports immunity, and even reduces inflammation. But recent research has opened a more intriguing frontier: the gut-brain connection. Scientists now know that the bacteria thriving on inulin produce neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine, which influence mood, focus, and even long-term resilience. A balanced gut flora, fueled by prebiotics like inulin, can sharpen cognition and stabilize emotional states. By contrast, the high glycemic foods that dominate modern diets spike blood sugar, feed harmful bacteria, and lead to fatigue, brain fog, and dependency. In this context, the shift from sunchokes to potatoes wasn't just nutritional. It may have been neurological. Whether intentional or not, feeding populations high-starch, fast-burning foods creates cycles of craving, crash, and compliance. Sunchokes, by contrast, promote sustained energy and microbial balance. It's a stretch to say food is control, but it's no stretch to say food is chemistry. And some chemistries build freer minds than others. The fuel that terrified the industry. By the 1980s, a new kind of hunger gripped the world. Not for food, but for energy. Oil crises had driven gas prices sky high, and governments began scrambling for domestic alternatives. Corn ethanol took the spotlight, but its promise was thin. Corn is an expensive crop, requiring heavy fertilization, fuel-intensive machinery, and irrigation. In many cases, it barely produced more energy than it consumed. That's when researchers turned their eyes to the sunroot. Trials revealed stunning results. Per acre, sunchokes could yield nearly twice the ethanol of corn, with a fraction of the input costs. Because it was perennial, there was no need to plow or replant. It thrived without fertilizers, and every part of the plant, from stalks to tubers, could be fermented into fuel. It was, on paper, the perfect biofuel crop. Farmers in the Midwest saw salvation. Facing bankruptcy during the farm crisis, they began planting sunchokes by the acre, anticipating a boom. It became known as the sunchoke gold rush. But the gold never came. Virtually overnight, the investment dried up. No processing plants were built, no buyers arrived. Farmers were left with fields of unwanted tubers and no way to sell or remove them. The official story blamed economics, but critics noted who stood to lose. A fuel that didn't require oil, fertilizer, or annual replanting? That wasn't just a crop, it was decentralization. And decentralization rarely makes billionaires. The soil that remembers. While governments and industries dismissed the sunroot as an economic dead end, the plant itself continued its quiet work beneath the surface, literally. In 2009, researchers at Oak Ridge National Laboratory discovered that Helianthus tuberosus could remove up to 90% of lead from contaminated soils in a single growing season. That figure stunned environmental scientists. Unlike mechanical cleanups or chemical treatments, this root didn't just survive toxic land, it healed it. Through a process known as phytoremediation, sunchokes draw heavy metals like lead, cadmium, and arsenic out of the soil and store them safely within their tissues. In post-industrial landscapes, abandoned fields, or the poison margins of cities, they act like biological first responders, reclaiming what humanity destroyed. This isn't just resilience, it's repair. What makes this more remarkable is that it wasn't designed in a lab. It evolved this way, tough enough to crack compacted soil, deep enough to channel water, and generous enough to leave behind biomass that regenerates topsoil. In many places, it arrives uninvited, colonizing forgotten ditches, road edges, and poisoned landfills. We call that invasive. But perhaps it's only invasive to our systems of control. To the land, it's a return. The rhizome of resistance. the sunroot isn't alone. Across the continent, crops once central to indigenous food systems tell the same story. The tepary bean, bred for desert survival, withers under industrial combines. The mesquite tree, a source of flour and medicine for centuries, was ripped out for cattle grazing. These were plants that thrived without intervention, resilient, diverse, and free. And that freedom became their downfall. Industrial agriculture favors crops that obey, those that grow in uniform rows, ripen on schedule, and fit neatly into global supply chains. Anything too wild, too unpredictable, or too resistant to standardization is pushed aside. The sunroot survived this purge not because it adapted, but because it refused. It couldn't be patented. It couldn't be marketed with shelf-stable consistency. It slipped through fences and laughed at pesticides. What kind of crop ignores the business plan? One rooted not in profit, but in reciprocity. Today, a gardener planting sunroots in a backyard isn't just growing food, they're reviving a system. A rhizome doesn't spread by force. It spreads by memory, by persistence, by showing up in the cracks. That's how resistance grows, not in lines, but in networks. Are we overlooking the very root that could outlast collapse, simply because it resists control? Or did we sever ties with a deeper, older agreement where the land gave freely and we remembered how to listen? If this unearths something for you, subscribe. Every like and every share keeps the memory alive. The next vault opens soon.